A retired Navy SEAL confronts ruthless bikers, the battle no one saw coming. It's a quiet evening in a small, seedy bar on the outskirts of town. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of conversation. A lone retired Navy SEAL, John Stone McAllister, sits at the corner table, nursing his drink, his weathered face a map of battles fought and scars earned. He wears a worn leather jacket, the kind that tells a story of its own, and his steely blue eyes remain vigilant, scanning the room. Suddenly, the door slams open, and a group of bikers storms in, their loud voices and raucous laughter shattering the calm. They're a menacing crew, led by Rick the Hammer Lawson, a hulking figure with tattoos covering every inch of his skin. He's the type of man who thrives on intimidation, the kind of biker who doesn't care about the rules. The tension in the bar thickens. McAllister, used to chaos from his military days, doesn't flinch, but his instincts immediately kick into overdrive. He notices the leader's aggressive posture, the way the bikers start eyeing the few patrons who remain. It's only a matter of time before trouble escalates. A minor altercation over the jukebox quickly escalates into a full-blown confrontation. The Hammer throws a punch, and before anyone can react, McAllister is on his feet, his movements fast and precise. The bar holds its breath. This is no ordinary fight. The Hammer's smirk widens, but there's a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the kind that only someone who's faced true danger can recognize. He's used to intimidating others with sheer size and power, but McAllister's stillness, his lack of fear, rattles him in a way he doesn't fully understand. Rick the Hammer Lawson isn't accustomed to being challenged by someone who doesn't bow to his presence, someone who doesn't flinch at the threat he represents. McAllister doesn't take the bait. Instead, his gaze is sharpened, the weight of years of military experience seeping into every move. He doesn't need to make a show of his strength. His calm is his weapon. "I've seen men like you before," McAllister says, his voice low but carrying a weight of authority that seems to settle over the room. "You get off on making people afraid, don't you?" The Hammer's jaw tightens, his nostrils flaring, but he doesn't respond immediately. The air between them crackles with tension as the rest of the bar watches in stunned silence, unsure of what's coming next. The other bikers, still rowdy and boisterous, fall into a temporary hush as they notice the subtle shift in the dynamic. They're used to the Hammer being the one in control, but now they're unsure. It's as though they've stumbled into a different kind of fight, one they're not sure they can win. Rick the Hammer steps closer, his boots thudding against the wooden floor with each stride. The anger in his eyes flares, but so does something else: recognition. He's no longer facing just a retired vet. He's facing someone who's stared death in the face and survived more than most men could ever comprehend. There's a part of him that wonders if he's made a mistake. "What do you think you're gonna do, hun?" The Hammer growls, his voice a rumble of anger. "You think you can teach me something?" McAllister's lips curl slightly into a hint of a smile. Barely noticeable, but there. "I'm not here to teach you anything," he replies, his voice steady. "But you might learn something before this is over." For a split second, the Hammer hesitates. It's a fleeting moment, but it's enough. The room feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The other bikers eye McAllister warily, but none of them make a move. They've all seen the veterans, the ones who can never truly leave the battlefield, and McAllister's presence alone is enough to make them second-guess their bravado. The Hammer shakes his head, growling low in his throat, trying to regain control of the situation, but the shift in the air is palpable. There's a deep, primal understanding between the two men. McAllister isn't afraid, and that's something the Hammer doesn't know how to fight. He's used to fear being his weapon, but McAllister's calm is like a shield, deflecting everything he throws. "All right, old man," the Hammer spits, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. "You want to play tough? Let's see how far your talk gets you." Before McAllister can react, the hammer swings his massive fist toward him, a brutal and predictable move, the kind McAllister has seen 1,000 times before. But this time, he's ready. With the fluidity of a seasoned fighter, McAllister sidesteps, using the biker's momentum against him. He grabs the hammer's arm and twists it behind his back, a sharp, practiced motion that sends a wince of pain through the hammer's body. The biker stumbles forward, off balance and caught by surprise. The room falls into stunned silence. Even the other bikers freeze, unsure of what to do next. The hammer, now with his arm pinned behind his back, growls in frustration, but there's a flicker of fear in his eyes now. For the first time, he's no longer the one in control. McAllister leans in close, his voice a low whisper that only the hammer can hear. "I don't want this to go any further," he says, his words calm but carrying the weight of someone who's seen the end of too many lives. "You walk away now, and we're done. You keep pushing, and I'll finish this. Understand?" Rick the Hammer Lawson doesn't answer. Instead, he lets out a strained breath, his pride wounded more than his body. Slowly, he raises his free hand in surrender, signaling to his crew that this battle is over. McAllister doesn't release him immediately, but he does loosen his grip, just enough to let the hammer know that he's in control, that he always has been. For a long moment, the bikers stand in stillness, their smirks replaced with cautious expressions. The hammer stands tall, his face reddening with humiliation, but he knows when he's been beaten. He's the one who looks away first, a rare admission of defeat. With a gruff, reluctant nod, the hammer motions for his crew to leave. "This place ain't worth our time," he mutters, his voice tinged with defeat. The bikers, reluctant but understanding, turn and head toward the door, casting one last look at McAllister as they leave. The door slams shut behind them and the bar is filled with a tense silence that lingers for a moment longer. But then, slowly, the patrons begin to murmur among themselves, the air shifting back to a more comfortable, if cautious, atmosphere. McAllister stands there for a moment longer, surveying the scene, before he sits back down at his corner table, his drink untouched, his mind already shifting back to the quiet rhythm of his retirement. The fight is over, but McAllister knows better than to believe that peace lasts long in a world like this. The bikers may have left, but the scars of tonight's confrontation will linger, both in the bar and in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The bar is filled with the deafening sounds of violence, the thud of fists, the crack of glass, the splintering of wood, and the grunts of men struggling for dominance. The bikers, unprepared for someone who could match them in raw skill and experience, flounder in the chaos. But McAllister remains calm, his every movement purposeful, his focus sharp. He is no longer just a retired Navy SEAL, he is the embodiment of years of combat training, years of living on the edge, and tonight, his instincts are razor sharp. The hammer's wild punch was meant to knock McAllister off balance, to assert his power, but McAllister, having seen countless similar attacks in his career, easily sidesteps, his body flowing with the grace of someone who has spent a lifetime in battle. As the hammer stumbles forward, the retired soldier uses the biker's own momentum against him, shoving him hard into the nearest table. The impact is brutal, and the table shatters like a fragile toy, sending splinters flying through the air. The room erupts into chaos. The remaining bikers, caught off guard, quickly rally behind their leader, fists raised, growling with fury, but McAllister is already in motion, his body shifting effortlessly between attackers. He doesn't waste time with unnecessary strikes. Every move is an extension of his military training, disarming and incapacitating the bikers with a fluid, almost elegant precision. The first biker lunges at him, aiming a sloppy punch that misses by a mile. McAllister steps to the side, grabs the man's wrist mid-swing, and with a swift twist, dislocates his arm, sending him crashing to the floor with a howl of pain. No sooner does he hit the ground than McAllister is already facing another opponent, this one swinging a bar stool at his head, but McAllister ducks, grabs the stool, and with a sharp, controlled motion, slams it back into the man's midsection. The biker folds in half, gasping for air as McAllister spins to face the next threat. The bar is a battleground. Broken bottles litter the floor. Chairs are overturned, and the smell of sweat and blood fills the air. Each punch, each block, each counter is calculated, a display of skill that's been honed through years of combat. McAllister doesn't just fight to win, he fights to survive, to protect himself and the people around him. Every move is designed to end the fight as quickly as possible. A second biker swings a heavy fist at McAllister's head, but the retired SEAL steps back, grabs the man's shoulder, and using his own body weight, flips him over his back, sending him crashing onto the ground with a sickening thud. McAllister's eyes never leave the Hammer, who is watching from the corner, rage burning in his eyes. McAllister knows the fight isn't over yet. It's only just begun. The sound of fists meeting flesh echoes around the room, and McAllister takes down biker after biker, using his environment to his advantage. A punch here, a chokehold there. Each biker crumples, incapacitated but alive, their pride shattered, and their bodies left sprawled across the floor. The few patrons who dared to stay in the bar hold their breath, too afraid to intervene, yet too fascinated to look away. McAllister's movements are fluid, efficient, like a predator picking off weaker prey. His face is expressionless, his breath steady. He's been through worse than this, and he knows how to stay calm when the world seems to be falling apart around him. This isn't just a physical fight. It's a test of willpower, a reminder to the bikers that respect isn't given, it's earned. But then, through the chaos, a heavy hand lands on McAllister's shoulder. It's the Hammer, his enormous frame looming behind the veteran. The smirk has disappeared, replaced by raw fury, his breath coming in heavy, angry bursts. "You think you're some kind of hero, old man?" The Hammer's voice is a low growl, full of venom and resentment. He's no longer just angry, he's terrified. The tide has turned, and now he knows he's facing someone who won't back down, someone who is a master at this kind of violence. McAllister doesn't need to answer. He simply spins on his heel, slamming his elbow into the Hammer's midsection. The air is knocked out of the biker, and for a moment, all the fight drains from his body. The Hammer stumbles back, gasping for air, but McAllister is on him before he can recover, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back with a speed that's almost too fast to see. "Get up," McAllister growls, his voice cold, but it's more of an order than an invitation. "You want more? Then stand up." The Hammer grits his teeth, sweat beating on his forehead. For a moment, it seems like he might refuse, but then the reality of the situation sinks in. He's beaten. His pride, his reputation, his very sense of power have all been shattered in the span of mere minutes, by a man who has nothing left to prove. With a growl, the Hammer pushes himself up from the floor, his body trembling with anger, humiliation, and fear. He looks around at his fallen crew, most of them still groaning on the floor, unable to move. The sight of his own men down and out, coupled with the fear that he's no longer the top dog, eats at him like a disease. He's been defeated, not by a stronger force, but by the very thing he'd underestimated: McAllister's resolve, his experience, his utter lack of fear. McAllister's eyes stay locked on him, unwavering. The fight is over. But the lesson, the respect McAllister demanded, has only just begun to sink in. The Hammer, his pride crushed, gives a final, contemptuous look to McAllister before he turns to his remaining crew. "Let's go," he snarls, his voice thick with shame. "We're done here." "Shut." The bikers, defeated and demoralized, slink out of the bar, their earlier bravado evaporating into the stale air. McAllister watches them go, his expression unchanged, but deep down, he knows they've learned a valuable lesson tonight. As the door slams shut behind the last of the bikers, The bar slowly begins to settle into a quiet hum again, but McAllister remains alert, his mind already turning back to the quiet, solitary life he's fought so hard to preserve. Tonight, he's reminded that no matter how far you run from the battlefield, the battle always finds you. The tension in the room is thick, almost suffocating, as McAllister's steady gaze sweeps over the remaining bikers. They're no longer the menacing pack of wolves who walked in with all the arrogance in the world. Now, they're wary, uncertain, undawned by the display of skill and control they've just witnessed. The once boisterous chatter has quieted to an eerie stillness, the sound of broken glass and groaning bodies the only noise that breaks the silence. The Hammer, still hunched over, breathless and furious, struggles to regain his composure. His fists are clenched, but his eyes, those eyes that once radiated power and fear, are now clouded with something much darker: doubt. He looks at McAllister, his chest heaving, the realization dawning that this fight, this battle for dominance, isn't something he can simply bully his way through. The man standing before him is a force unlike any he's faced, and the fear creeping into his veins is palpable. He believes the potential, despite his fears. There is a ton of spiritual matter here. But it's not just the Hammer who's feeling it. The rest of the bikers, all hardened by years of living on the edge, now exchange glances, the bravado that once fueled their every action dissipating. They've seen their leader take down countless opponents, and they've been the ones to cause chaos in countless places. But this is different. They've never faced a man like McAllister. McAllister's calm, calculated demeanor only deepens the sense of unease. His presence is commanding, unyielding, and it forces the bikers to reassess everything they thought they knew about power. The silent challenge in his eyes tells them all they need to know. He's not here to make a show of violence. He's here to end it on his terms, not theirs. And that, in itself, is perhaps the most dangerous thing about him. "Walk away," McAllister repeats, his voice like steel. No hesitation, no mercy. It's not a threat. It's an ultimatum. The room seems to close in around the bikers as they feel the weight of his words settle over them. It's a simple command, but it carries the weight of a man who has seen and done things that would break lesser men. McAllister doesn't want to ruin their lives over a petty fight. He doesn't need to prove himself. He's already done that. But if they choose to continue, they'll be dealing with something far worse than a fight. The Hammer stands a little straighter, though it's clear he's struggling to regain control. He's not used to being the one on the back foot, the one who's had his pride stripped bare in front of his crew. His hand shakes as he wipes blood from his mouth, eyes narrowing as he glares at McAllister. For a moment, it seems like he might charge again, that all the anger in him will boil over. But the fire in his eyes falters, flickering as he looks around at his men. They're not the fierce bikers they were when they walked in. Now they're just men, uncertain, second-guessing their every move. The weight of McAllister's stare shifts from the Hammer to the other bikers, and the room holds its collective breath. It's clear McAllister isn't just fighting for survival. He's fighting for something deeper. He's fighting for respect, for control over his own fate. And he's not willing to let these men take that away from him. His eyes flicker with something sharp, something almost dangerous, as they lock onto the bikers, daring them to make the next move. The Hammer's crew starts to shift uncomfortably, one by one. Some of the bikers take a hesitant step back, their pride bruised, but their fear outweighing it. The usual cocky grins are gone, replaced by uncertain expressions as they look to their leader for direction. But the Hammer, still grappling with his own humiliation, says nothing. The silence stretches longer than anyone in the room is comfortable with. Finally, it's one of the younger bikers who breaks the silence, his voice tentative. "Rick, maybe we should just go." "Rick!" The Hammer's eyes snap to the young man, his face a mixture of disbelief and rage. But as he looks around at his crew, most of whom are too battered to fight, and others who are simply unwilling, something shifts in him. The anger, the pride, the need for dominance, all seems to drain from his body. For the first time that night, He seems small, uncertain. McAllister's gaze never wavers. He's won. Not through sheer physical force, but through something far stronger. Resolve. He's not interested in showing the bikers just how powerful he is. He's shown them that they don't own this town, that respect isn't something you can bully your way into. It's earned. The Hammer takes a step back, then another, his eyes flicking to his crew. Slowly, one by one, the bikers turn away from McAllister, their heads low, as though ashamed of what they almost started. The tension in the room is broken, and McAllister watches in silence, waiting for them to leave. "Oh," the Hammer, shoulders slumped in defeat, finally mutters, "Let's go." His voice is low, lacking the commanding tone it had before, and the crew follows him, walking past McAllister with their heads bowed. As the bikers exit the bar, the door slams shut behind them, the noise like the final exhale of a long-held breath. The room is still. The bar, once filled with the noise of chaos and intimidation, is now eerily quiet, save for the soft clinking of glass and the faint murmur of distant conversations. McAllister remains standing, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning the room, never fully allowing himself to let down his guard. The bar slowly begins to breathe again, the patrons who had been frozen in place slowly returning to their drinks and conversations. But there's an unspoken acknowledgement in the air. Something has shifted tonight. And it wasn't just the bikers who were taught a lesson, it's everyone who witnessed it. McAllister, the retired Navy SEAL, has reminded them all that respect isn't given, it's demanded. And sometimes, the most dangerous men are the ones who don't need to prove it. The bikers take a few hesitant steps back, their once brash swagger now replaced with palpable caution. The Hammer, who had been ready to tear through anyone who dared challenge him, now seems smaller, his usual confidence stripped away. His chest rises and falls with the heavy breaths of defeat, and his eyes lock with McAllister's. Something flickers behind them. It's no longer the rage or disdain that had fueled him earlier. No, now there's a grudging acknowledgement, something McAllister knows all too well. Respect. "You've got guts, old man," the Hammer mutters, his voice low and strained. He wipes the blood from his lip, his expression shifting as he absorbs the weight of what's just happened. McAllister's calm, focused demeanor had thrown him off balance in a way he wasn't prepared for, and it stings worse than the punches he's taken. The words are grudging, but they carry more meaning than any boast or threat. McAllister nods, just once, acknowledging the gesture. He doesn't need words to validate the fight. He's already won, not through force or violence, but through sheer will and control. He's shown the Hammer and his crew that respect isn't something that can be bullied out of people, it must be earned. Without another word, the Hammer and his gang turn and begin to file out of the bar, their shoulders hunched, their pride shattered but not entirely gone. As they leave, the door slams shut behind them with an almost finality to it, the sound echoing through the room. The atmosphere in the bar shifts instantly. The patrons, who had been frozen in place during the entire altercation, now stir, glancing at one another as the tension in the air dissipates. It's as if the bar itself has been holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of the standoff. Then, slowly at first, a few claps break the silence, tentative and unsure. But before long, the clapping grows louder, spreading through the room like a wave. The patrons are not just applauding the outcome of the fight, but the quiet strength McAllister had shown, the way he had handled a situation that could have escalated into chaos. The bartender, who had been too afraid to move during the confrontation, wipes a glass clean, his hands still trembling slightly. He meets McAllister's gaze for a moment, offering a silent thanks, before returning to his duties. The other regulars murmur among themselves, speaking in hushed tones as they try to process what they've just witnessed. McAllister, however, remains the same as he had been throughout the entire ordeal, calm, collected, and composed. He takes a final sip of his drink, savoring the cool burn of the liquor as it settles in his stomach. The bar is slowly returning to normal, but McAllister knows the effects of tonight's events will linger far beyond this evening. The bikers had come in, thinking they owned the town, and McAllister had shown them otherwise, but it wasn't just them who needed to learn that lesson. It was the whole town. He stands, his movements slow but deliberate, and for a moment, the room quiets once more as all eyes turn toward him. He doesn't need to say anything. His presence alone has already made an impression, one that will be remembered long after the night is over. McAllister takes one last look around the bar. The battle is over, but the respect earned in that moment is timeless. There's a certain power in knowing when to fight, and just as much in knowing when to let the storm pass without adding fuel to it. The fight had never been about who was stronger or who could take down more opponents. It had been about control, and McAllister, with all his years of discipline, had shown everyone what it meant to control not just a fight, but the outcome of a situation. As the evening begins to wind down, the applause fades, replaced by the low hum of conversations picking up again. McAllister finishes his drink in one final, smooth motion. The weight of the night is settling in, but there's no fatigue in his step. He knows that he's done what needed to be done, not for himself, but for the town, for the people who had witnessed what just transpired. He walks out into the cool night air, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The world outside is quiet, the streets deserted, but McAllister's eyes remain sharp, ever watchful. He doesn't need to look over his shoulder to know that things have changed tonight. In this town, the balance of power has shifted for good, and McAllister, the retired Navy SEAL, is content knowing that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with fists. They're won with the quiet strength of standing firm in the face of chaos.